They say the woods were shaking that night, not from thunder, but from the sound of Isaiah Turner, an 11-year-old boy running for his mother's life. He burst into the cabin of Silas Mercer, a white bounty hunter known for tracking people like Isaiah, and with rain in his eyes he choked out, "They're hurting my mama." Most men, like Silas, would have dragged him right back. But Silas wasn't most men. He carried a secret, one tied to Isaiah's past, and the guilt he'd hoped the world would forget. Before sunrise, the two strangers, a desperate boy and a haunted hunter, would walk back toward the very plantation both feared, one to save a mother, the other to save his soul. And by the next day, Isaiah wasn't running anymore. He was leading a storm. Because in this story, the smallest voice can start the biggest uprising, and mercy can turn a man into a weapon. When a boy begs you to save his mother, how far would you go to end the nightmare? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Rain hammered the earth like fists pounding flesh. Isaiah pressed himself flat against the smokehouse wall. The wood was rough against his cheek. Water streamed down his face, mixing with tears he couldn't stop. Lightning split the sky, and for one terrible moment, everything turned white. He saw them clearly. 3 overseers, tall men with wide shoulders. They dragged his mother through the mud, their hands gripping her arms so tight her skin bunched beneath their fingers. Letty's feet scraped along the ground. She tried to walk, tried to keep up, but they pulled too fast. "Please," Letty said. Her voice cut through the storm. "Please, I was only—" "Shut your mouth," one of them barked. The door to the punishment shed swung open. Yellow lamplight spilled out onto the rain-soaked yard. Isaiah's stomach twisted into knots. He knew that shed. Everyone knew it. The walls were thick so nobody could hear what happened inside. Thunder rolled across the plantation like a warning. Isaiah's legs shook. He was 11 years old, small for his age. His arms were thin as reeds. What could he do against grown men? Against overseers who carried whips and guns? Nothing. He could do nothing. But watching them drag his mother into that shed felt like swallowing hot coals. "Gonna teach this one proper," another overseer said. He laughed as he spoke. The sound made Isaiah's skin crawl. "Thinks she can tell us how to manage our own workers, protecting old folks who can't pull their weight no more. We'll make sure everyone sees what happens to troublemakers," the third man added. "Come sunrise, won't be nobody else stepping out of line." The door slammed shut. Isaiah bit down on his knuckle to keep from screaming. His mother had only done what she always did, stood between harm and those who couldn't protect themselves. Earlier that day, 2 elderly workers had collapsed in the cotton field. The overseers wanted to drag them back to work. Letty had stepped forward, calm and steady, and said they needed water and rest first. She'd said it quiet, respectful, the way she always spoke. It hadn't mattered. Now she would pay for her kindness. Isaiah's mind raced. He couldn't fight 3 men, couldn't break down the shed door, couldn't overpower anyone. But if he stayed here, crouched in the mud like a rabbit, his mother would suffer until sunrise. And then they'd parade her broken body in front of everyone as a warning. The thought made him sick. He had to find help, had to find someone, anyone, who could stop this. But who? The other enslaved workers were locked in their quarters for the night. Master Blackthorn wouldn't listen to a child, wouldn't care even if Isaiah could reach him. The neighboring plantations were miles away, and their owners were no better. Isaiah's breath came in short gasps. Rain plastered his shirt to his skin. He was running out of time, running out of options. He had to run, had to try. Lightning flashed again, and Isaiah memorized the layout of the yard. Guards stood near the main house. Dogs prowled the eastern fence line, but the western edge, where the forest crept close to the property, looked darker, emptier. He waited. Thunder boomed. The dogs lifted their heads, ears flattening against the noise. The guards turned toward the storm, squinting against the rain. Isaiah moved. He kept low, scrambling through the mud on his hands and knees. His bare feet slipped. Thorns tore at his palms. He didn't slow down. The water trough sat 20 yards ahead, a long, deep basin used for the horses. The dogs barked. Isaiah's heart stopped. Had they seen him? Smelled him? He dove into the trough. The water was cold enough to steal his breath. He sank beneath the surface, holding himself down with his hands pressed against the wooden bottom. His lungs burned. His chest screamed for air. Above him, he heard muffled shouts, footsteps splashing through puddles. "Check the quarters. Make sure nobody's missing." "Dogs are just spooked by the storm," Isaiah counted. 1, 2, 3. His vision began to blur. 4, 5, 6. He broke the surface, gasping as quietly as he could. The guards had moved toward the eastern fence. The dogs strained against their chains, but they weren't looking his way anymore. Another crack of lightning had distracted them, a tree branch falling somewhere in the distance. Isaiah climbed out of the trough. Water poured from his clothes. He was shaking so hard his teeth clattered together. But the woods were close now, just beyond the fence, just past the last row of slave quarters. He ran. His feet pounded against mud, then grass, then the soft forest floor covered in pine needles and rotting leaves. Branches whipped his face. Roots tried to trip him. He kept going, pushing deeper into the darkness, away from the plantation, away from the punishment shed, away from his mother's screams that he could still hear in his head, even though he was too far away to hear them for real. Time blurred. He ran until his legs gave out. Ran until he couldn't remember which direction he'd come from. The storm followed him, soaking him through, turning the world into a wet, black maze. Hours passed. Maybe. Isaiah couldn't tell anymore. His feet bled, his lungs ached, his whole body shook with cold and exhaustion. Then he saw it. A light. Dim. Flickering. Like a single lantern burning in a window. A cabin sat tucked between the trees, small, weathered, half hidden by overgrown brush. Isaiah had never seen it before. Never knew anyone lived this deep in the woods. Hope surged through him like lightning. He stumbled forward. His legs barely worked. His vision swam. But he made it to the porch, made it to the door. Isaiah collapsed onto the rough wooden planks. He pounded on the door with what little strength remained. "Please!" His voice cracked, broke. "Please! They're hurting my mama!" Inside the cabin, Silas Mercer sat at a rough-hewn table, cleaning his rifle by lamplight. The storm rattled the shutters. Wind howled through gaps in the logs. He'd lived alone in these woods for 2 years now, and he'd learned to read the sounds of the forest. Tonight felt different. The air carried a tension that had nothing to do with weather. He set down his cleaning rag and picked up the rifle. Something moved on the porch. Silas rose slowly, his joints creaking. He was 43 years old, but some days he felt twice that. The weight of past choices had a way of aging a man from the inside out. The pounding came sudden and desperate. "Please! They're hurting my mama!" Silas's finger found the trigger. Could be a trick. Could be raiders using a child's voice to lure him outside. He'd seen worse tactics during his years hunting fugitives across 3 states. He approached the door, pressed his ear against the wood. Rain, thunder, and the ragged breathing of someone small. Silas yanked the door open, rifle raised. A child collapsed across the threshold. The boy was soaked through, shivering violently, barefoot and bleeding. He looked up at Silas with eyes so wide and terrified that something cracked inside the old bounty hunter's chest. "Please," the boy whispered. "Please, they'll kill her by morning." Silas lowered the rifle. His hands moved on instinct, reaching down to scoop the child up before his brain caught up with his body. The boy weighed almost nothing, just skin and bones and rain-soaked clothes. "Easy now," Silas said. He kicked the door shut behind them and carried the boy to the fireplace. "You're safe here." He set the rifle against the wall, far enough away that it wouldn't frighten the child, close enough that he could reach it if needed. Old habits died hard. The boy curled into himself, teeth chattering so hard Silas could hear them clicking together. "Let's get you warm." Silas grabbed a wool blanket from the back of his chair and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders. He stoked the fire, adding 2 more logs until flames leaped higher. "What's your name, son?" Isaiah." The word came out broken. "Isaiah Turner." "I'm Silas." He moved to the water basin and filled a tin cup. "Drink this slow. Not too fast, or you'll make yourself sick." Isaiah's hands shook as he took the cup. Water sloshed over the rim. He drank like someone who'd forgotten what water tasted like. Silas knelt down and examined the boy's feet. The soles were torn and bloody, embedded with dirt and pine needles. He'd seen injuries like this before, knew what they meant. Someone had run a long way in a hurry. "Hold still." Silas fetched his medical kit. A battered leather case he'd carried for years. Inside were bandages, salve, a needle, and thread for stitching wounds, tools of his old trade. He'd patched up more than a few injuries during his bounty hunting days, though usually he'd been the one causing them. He cleaned Isaiah's feet with careful hands. The boy winced, but didn't cry out. "You said someone's hurting your mother?" Silas kept his voice gentle, non-threatening. "Tell me what happened." Isaiah's words tumbled out between shivers. He spoke of a plantation called Blackthorn, of overseers dragging his mother to a punishment shed, of threats to make an example of her come sunrise. Silas's hands stilled on the bandage he was wrapping. "Your mother," he said slowly. "What's her name?" "Letty." Isaiah looked up at him with desperate hope. "Letty Turner. She didn't do nothing wrong. She just tried to help some old folks who couldn't work no more. The overseers got mad and—" The rest of Isaiah's words faded into background noise. Letty. The name hit Silas like a physical blow. His vision narrowed. The cabin seemed to tilt sideways. He remembered. Rain falling on a different night. A wagon rolling through darkness. The woman in chains sitting across from him, her hands bound but her back straight. She didn't beg, didn't plead, just looked at him with steady eyes that asked a single question. "How can you do this?" He'd delivered her to Blackthorn Plantation himself. His final job. His last paycheck for dragging human beings back to captivity. "What's your name?" he'd asked, though he'd known he shouldn't. "Letty," she'd said. Her voice was calm despite everything. "And I got a son named Isaiah waiting for me to come home." But there'd been no coming home. Only the plantation gates closing behind her. Only Silas riding away with blood money in his pocket. Silas's throat constricted. His hands trembled as he finished tying off Isaiah's bandage. "Mister?" Isaiah's voice cut through the memory. "Mr. Silas? Can you help her?" Silas looked at the boy, saw Letty's features in his face, the same determined set to his jaw, the same fire behind his fear. This child had no idea. No idea that he'd stumbled to the door of the very man who'd stolen his mother away years ago. No idea that Silas Mercer had once made a living destroying families just like his. "How far is Blackthorn from here?" Silas asked. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "I don't know. I ran for hours, through the woods. I didn't know where I was going. I just saw your light and—" Isaiah grabbed Silas's sleeve. "Please, you got to help her. She's all I got." Silas stood abruptly. He turned away from Isaiah, gripping the edge of the table with both hands. The wood grain blurred in front of his eyes. He'd quit bounty hunting 2 years ago. Quit because he couldn't stomach what he'd become. Couldn't look at himself in the mirror anymore. He'd tried to make amends in small ways, forged passes for runaways, left supplies at known safe houses, turned a blind eye when he spotted fugitives in town. But he'd never forgotten Letty Turner's face, never stopped hearing her say her son's name. And now that son sat behind him, wrapped in a blanket, waiting for an answer. "I owe that woman more than she'll ever know," Silas whispered to himself. The storm had softened to steady rain by the time Isaiah's breathing evened out into sleep. Silas stood by the window, watching water drip from the eaves. The sky had shifted from black to deep gray. Dawn wasn't far off. Maybe an hour, maybe less. He looked back at the boy curled up by the fire. Isaiah had finally stopped shivering. The blanket rose and fell with each breath. His feet were wrapped in clean bandages, and he'd eaten the bread and salted meat Silas had given him. Small mercies, but sleep wouldn't save Letty Turner. Silas moved across the cabin floor, careful to avoid the boards that creaked. He'd memorized which ones made noise during his first week living here. A man who'd spent years tracking people learned to walk silent as a ghost. He knelt in the corner farthest from the fireplace. His fingers found the gaps between two floorboards and lifted. The boards came up smooth and quiet. Beneath them sat a wooden crate. Silas pulled it out and set it on the floor beside him. Inside were the tools of his new trade, the one nobody knew about except him and the people he'd helped slip away in the night. Forged travel papers sat in neat stacks, each one carefully aged to look legitimate. He'd learned the art from a printer in Charleston who owed him a favor. The signatures were perfect copies of officials who'd never signed their names to freedom. Coded maps showed safe routes through the wetlands, marked houses where sympathetic folks would hide runaways, river crossings that patrol boats missed, caves deep enough to wait out search parties. Lantern signals were written on scraps of paper, sequences of light that meant all clear, or danger ahead, or meet at the oak tree. Tools lined the bottom of the crate, lock picks, wire cutters, a small saw that could cut through iron shackles if you had patience and time. Silas ran his hand over the contents. 2 years of secret work. 2 years of trying to balance scales that would never be even. He'd helped 19 people escape so far. 19 souls who might have died otherwise, but he'd caught and delivered 47 during his bounty hunting years. The math didn't work in his favor. It never would. Should he tell Isaiah about this? Show him that he wasn't just some random white man living in the woods? Silas closed his eyes, imagined the conversation. "Listen, boy, I know you got no reason to trust me, but see, I used to hunt people like your mother for money. Dragged them back to plantations in chains. Made a good living at it too. But I quit, and now I help folks escape. So that makes it all right, doesn't it?" No, it didn't make anything right. And the boy would see it exactly that way. Would see Silas as one more white man with too much power over black lives. Someone who'd switched sides but still held all the cards. Still got to decide who lived and who died. Who went free and who stayed in chains. Isaiah would be right to see it that way. Silas lowered the crate back into its hiding place, replaced the floorboards carefully. The secret would stay buried. He'd help Letty because it was the only decent thing to do, not because he wanted credit for it. He stood and turned around. Isaiah's eyes were open. Silas froze. How long had the boy been awake? "What were you doing?" Isaiah asked. His voice was thick with sleep but alert. "Nothing." Silas moved away from the corner. "Just checking something." Isaiah sat up, the blanket falling from his shoulders. He looked at the floorboards, then at Silas, then back at the floor. His expression was unreadable. Silas waited for the question, waited for Isaiah to demand answers. Instead, Isaiah said, "I need to tell you about Blackthorn, about where they keep people. The tension in Silas's chest eased slightly. The boy hadn't seen anything, or if he had, he was choosing not to ask about it. All right. Silas pulled a chair closer to the fire and sat down. Tell me everything you remember. Isaiah spoke with surprising clarity for someone his age. He described the layout of the plantation with the precision of someone who'd studied it for survival. The punishment shed sat behind the main house, a small building with iron rings bolted to the walls. No windows. One door that locked from the outside. The overseer barracks were near the eastern fence. 3 men usually slept there, but sometimes more during harvest season. They kept their rifles by their beds, and their dogs chained outside. The livestock yard stretched along the southern property line. Horses, mules, chickens. The animals made noise at night, which meant movement there wouldn't draw as much attention. The auction pen stood empty most of the time. A raised platform surrounded by rails. Isaiah's voice went quiet when he talked about it. Said he'd watched people sold there, families separated, children crying for parents who couldn't reach them anymore. Silas listened without interrupting. Every detail mattered. Every piece of information could mean the difference between success and disaster. When Isaiah finished, Silas asked, "How many overseers total?" 5 that I seen regular. Maybe more I don't know about. Armed? All of them. Rifles and whips. Dogs? 6. Big ones. Mean. Silas stood and walked to the far wall where he kept his weapons. A rifle. A pistol. A hunting knife. Not an arsenal, but enough. He also gathered other supplies. 2 canteens filled with water. Dried meat wrapped in cloth. A map of the wetlands he'd drawn himself after months of exploration. Isaiah watched him work. You really gonna help her? Silas paused. The question hung in the air between them. He could say no. Could send Isaiah back into the rain and pretend this night never happened. Could go back to his quiet existence, helping strangers he'd never have to look in the eye. But Letty Turner wasn't a stranger, and her son was standing right here waiting for an answer. Yes, Silas said. I'm gonna help her. Isaiah's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. Silas pulled his spare coat from a peg on the wall and tossed it to Isaiah. We might not make it in time. We might get caught. We might get killed. You understand that? Isaiah slipped the coat on. It hung past his knees like a dress, but it would keep the rain off. I understand. But we got to try. We got to try, Silas agreed. He loaded the rifle and tucked the pistol into his belt, slung the canteens over his shoulder, folded the map, and put it in his pocket. The cabin suddenly felt too small, too safe. Out there in the wet morning forest, danger waited. Armed men, trained dogs, a system designed to crush anyone who challenged it. But Letty Turner was out there too, probably still alive, probably still hoping someone would come. Silas walked to the door, put his hand on the latch. The rain drummed against the roof in steady rhythm. He looked back at Isaiah. The boy stood by the fire, swimming in an oversized coat, his bandaged feet barely touching the floor. He looked impossibly young, impossibly fragile. But his eyes held something Silas recognized, something he'd seen in mirrors during his darker years, the look of someone who'd do whatever it took to survive, who'd sacrifice anything to protect the people they loved. Stay close, Silas said, and stay quiet. He opened the door. The rain had stopped, but the forest floor stayed slick with mud. Silas stepped carefully, testing each footfall before putting his weight down. Isaiah moved ahead of him like a shadow, ducking under branches that barely reached Silas's chest. The boy knew these woods. That much was clear. This way, Isaiah whispered, veering left around a fallen log thick with moss. There's a creek up ahead. We can follow it most of the way. Silas nodded. He'd learned long ago not to argue with people who knew the land better than him. Isaiah had spent his whole life here, had probably explored every path and hiding spot within miles of the plantation. They moved in silence, listening for sounds of pursuit. Dogs barking, men shouting, horses crashing through underbrush. Nothing came. The forest around them stayed quiet, except for bird calls and wind moving through leaves. Morning light filtered down through the canopy in pale shafts. The world smelled of wet earth and green things growing. Isaiah led him to the creek he'd mentioned. The water ran low and lazy, barely deep enough to cover their ankles. They waded upstream, leaving no tracks on the muddy banks. "Overseers don't come this far out," Isaiah said. "Not unless someone runs, and they always expect runners to go the other way, toward the river." "Why don't they?" Silas asked. "Because that's where the patrol boats are, where the trackers wait." Isaiah glanced back at him. "Most folks who run get caught in the first day, brought back and whipped in front of everyone. Makes people scared to try." Silas's jaw tightened. He'd been part of that system once, had tracked people through woods just like these, had dragged them back to punishment he never stayed around to witness. They walked for another hour. Isaiah pointed out landmarks only someone who'd traveled these routes would notice. A tree with bark stripped in 3 places, a rock shaped like a broken tooth, a bend in the creek where wild mint grew thick. "We fetch water here sometimes," Isaiah explained, "when the well by the quarters runs low. And Miss Ora, she comes out to gather herbs for medicine. The overseers let her because she treats their cuts and fevers too." Smart, Silas thought. Make yourself valuable to the people who owned you. Give them a reason to need you alive. The creek led them through dense undergrowth where sunlight barely reached. Thorns caught at Silas's clothes. Isaiah slipped through the same spaces without leaving a mark. Around mid-morning, the trees began to thin. Isaiah held up a hand and crouched low. Silas did the same. "Ridge is just ahead," Isaiah breathed. "We can see the whole plantation from there, but we got to be careful." Sometimes they post a guard. They crawled the last 50 yards on their bellies. The wet ground soaked through Silas's shirt and pants. His rifle dragged in the mud. He'd clean it later if they survived this. The ridge dropped off sharply on the far side. Below, Blackthorn Plantation spread out like a map drawn in wood and dirt. Silas had seen plantations before, had delivered human cargo to dozens of them over the years. But seeing one through Isaiah's eyes made it different somehow, made the horror of it sharper. The main house stood white and tall with columns across the front. Behind it, smaller buildings clustered like an infection. The punishment shed Isaiah had described. The overseer barracks, storage buildings, a barn. Further out, the fields stretched in neat rows. Cotton plants stood waist-high, their bolls not yet ready for harvest. A few workers moved between the rows even now, their backs bent under the noon sun. "There," Isaiah pointed to a small structure behind the main house. "That's where they took Momma. I saw them drag her inside." Silas studied the building. One door. No windows he could see. Iron rings mounted to the outside walls. Probably more inside, too. A place designed for one purpose only. "Guard rotation?" he asked. Isaiah squinted. 2 men usually. They swap out every 4 hours. Next change should be around 2 o'clock. Good. That gave them information they could use. Movement near the main house caught Silas's attention. 2 wagons rolled into the yard, pulled by horses that looked too fine for hauling goods. The drivers climbed down, brushing dust from expensive coats. Traders. Silas's stomach turned. He knew their type. Had worked with men like them. They bought and sold human beings the way other merchants traded in tobacco or cotton. "They're early," Isaiah whispered. "Auction's not supposed to be till next week." Silas watched as Jeremiah Blackthorn emerged from the main house. The plantation owner was a tall man with silver hair and a coat that probably cost more than most people earned in a year. He shook hands with the traders, like they were old friends. 3 overseers joined them in the yard, rifles slung across their backs. One carried a leather-bound book, probably a ledger. The group moved to a shaded area near the barn, too far away to hear words, but their body language told a story. Blackthorn gestured toward the punishment shed. One of the traders nodded and made notes. The overseer with the ledger opened it and pointed to entries. Silas felt ice form in his chest. "What are they doing?" Isaiah asked. Silas didn't answer right away. He watched the men talk and gesture, watched Blackthorn point toward the fields, then toward the quarters where enslaved families lived. The trader made more notes. "They're planning something," Silas said finally. "Something big." One of the overseers left the group and returned minutes later with another man, this one wearing the rough clothes of a driver. The driver spoke to Blackthorn, who nodded and pointed toward the punishment shed again. The pattern became clear, the timing, the early arrival, the ledger full of names. "Oh, God," Silas breathed. "What?" Isaiah's voice climbed higher. "What is it?" "They're planning a punishment display. At dawn tomorrow, probably. Something public to scare everyone before—" He stopped. "Before what?" Silas turned to look at Isaiah. The boy deserved the truth. "Before a mass sale. They're going to sell multiple families at once, probably tomorrow or the day after." Isaiah's face went pale. "How many families?" "I don't know. But your mama's name is in that ledger. I'd bet my life on it." Below them, the meeting continued. Blackthorn shook hands with the traders again. Money changed hands. A deposit, most likely. The overseers received orders that sent 2 of them toward the quarters. Silas watched it all happen with the sick certainty of someone who'd seen this play out before. The system worked like a machine, efficient, ruthless, designed to break spirits before breaking up families. He'd been a cog in that machine once, had helped it run smooth. A patrol emerged from the tree line on the far side of the plantation. 4 men on horseback with dogs running ahead. They were sweeping the perimeter, probably looking for Isaiah. "We need to move," Silas said. "Now!" They crawled backward from the ridge, staying low until the trees gave them cover. Then they ran deeper into the forest, putting distance between themselves and the patrol. They didn't stop until they reached a dense thicket, where the undergrowth grew too thick for horses. Silas collapsed against a tree trunk, breathing hard. Isaiah crouched beside him, his face streaked with dirt and fear. For a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of what they'd seen pressed down like a physical thing. Finally, Isaiah broke the silence. His voice came out fierce and tight. "We can't just take my mama." Silas looked at him. "They'll hurt all the others," Isaiah continued. His hands curled into fists. "Everyone whose name is in that book. Everyone they're planning to sell. We can't leave them." Silas closed his eyes. He'd known this mission was complicated, had known saving one woman from a guarded plantation would be nearly impossible. But saving multiple families? Stopping a planned sale? Going up against Blackthorn and his overseers, and the traders who'd already paid their deposit? That wasn't a rescue mission anymore. That was war. He opened his eyes and looked at Isaiah, really looked at him, saw the determination burning there. The same fire he'd seen in other people who'd reached the point where survival meant fighting back. Silas nodded solemnly. The mission had just changed. Silas and Isaiah moved from the ridge to the cane fields bordering the plantation as afternoon light grew harsh. The sun beat down without mercy, turning the air thick and wet. Sweat soaked through Silas's shirt. Isaiah moved ahead like a shadow, finding paths through the cane that Silas couldn't see until he was standing in them. The stalks grew 10 feet tall in places, dense enough to hide an army, dense enough that Silas lost sight of the main house completely once they were 20 yards in. "How do you know where you're going?" Silas asked quietly. "Count the rows," Isaiah whispered back, "and watch for the broken stalks. People leave marks." He was right. Once Silas knew to look, he saw them. Stalks bent at specific angles, leaves torn in patterns, a language written in damaged plants that only people who worked these fields would understand. They pushed deeper. The cane rustled around them with every step, a sound that made Silas nervous. Too easy for someone to hear. Too easy to walk into a trap. Isaiah stopped suddenly and held up his hand. Silas froze. The boy tilted his head, listening. Then he started humming. Not loud, barely louder than the breeze moving through the cane. A slow tune that rose and fell like water over stones. Silas had heard enslaved people hum while working, had never paid attention to the melodies. Now he realized those tunes carried meaning, messages hidden in notes that sounded like nothing to ears that didn't know how to listen. Isaiah hummed the phrase 3 times, then stopped. They waited. For a long minute, nothing happened. Silas's hand drifted toward his rifle. Maybe the signal hadn't worked. Maybe. The answering hum came from somewhere to their left. Same melody but shifted slightly. A confirmation. Isaiah moved toward the sound. Silas followed, stepping where the boy stepped. They found the hiding place in a section where several stalks had been carefully cleared away, leaving a hollow space barely visible from the outside. 3 people crouched inside, watching them approach with wary eyes. The eldest was a woman whose face carried more lines than any person should have earned by their years. Her hair had gone completely gray, wrapped tight under a faded cloth. Her hands were scarred from decades of hard use, but they moved with steady confidence as she gestured for silence. Miss Ora, Silas guessed. The midwife Isaiah had mentioned. The other 2 were younger. A man in his 20s with broad shoulders and suspicion etched deep in his expression. A woman about the same age, thin and quick-eyed, who studied Silas like she was memorizing everything about him. Miss Ora spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. Isaiah Turner. You got half the plantation looking for. I know. Isaiah crouched beside her. Miss Ora, they got Momma in the punishment shed, and there's worse coming. Her eyes sharpened. Tell it plain. Isaiah explained what they'd seen from the ridge. The traders arriving early. Blackthorn meeting with them in secret. The ledger with names. The plans for a dawn punishment display followed by a mass sale. Miss Ora's face didn't change much, but Silas saw her hands tighten. The younger man, Thaddeus, made a sound low in his throat, like a growl. The woman stayed silent, but her jaw clenched. How many families? Miss Ora asked. We couldn't tell for certain, Silas said, but based on what I saw, at least 6, maybe more. All 3 sets of eyes turned to him then, really seeing him for the first time, taking in his white skin, his rifle, his worn coat that marked him as someone who lived outside the plantation's boundaries. Who are you? Thaddeus asked. His voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. Name's Silas Mercer. I know that name. Thaddeus stood up, his size suddenly obvious in the cramped space. I know your face, too. You ran bounties. Caught people trying to get north. Silas didn't flinch. I did. You brought them back to places like this. Got paid for it. Yes. The young woman, Pearl, shifted position slightly, putting herself between Miss Ora and Silas. Protective. Thaddeus took a step forward. And now you want us to trust you? To let you help us? I don't expect trust, Silas said evenly. I'm just offering what I know. You can use it or not. Why? Miss Ora's question cut through the tension. Why now? Why this? Silas looked at Isaiah. The boy stared back at him with eyes that had seen too much for 11 years. Because I brought Letty to this plantation, Silas said. Years ago. It was my last job before I quit the work, and I've been trying to undo what I did ever since. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to smother. Finally, Miss Ora spoke. The community's been preparing. We got plans if things get bad enough that running's the only choice left. But we never had nobody who knew how the other side thinks, how the patrols work, how the system operates. She paused, studying Silas with eyes that had witnessed decades of suffering and survival. "We've been waiting for the right moment," she continued, "for the right advantage. Maybe this is it." "Maybe it's a trap," Thaddeus said. "Maybe," Miss Ora agreed. "But Letty's in that shed right now, and 6 families about to be sold off. We don't do something. We just keep waiting while they break us apart, piece by piece." Pearl spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but firm. "I'll help. Whatever needs doing." Thaddeus looked between them all. His hands opened and closed. Finally, he nodded once. "Rules, though. Clear ones." "Agreed," Silas said. Miss Ora pointed at Isaiah. "Inside the quarters, among our people, you follow this boy's lead. He knows who to trust and who might talk." Then she pointed at Silas. "Outside, in the woods, dealing with patrols and planning the tactical pieces. That's your territory." "Fair enough," Silas said. Thaddeus stepped closer to Silas, close enough that they were almost touching. "You betray us, you won't live to regret it." "I know. I mean it. I'll kill you myself." Silas met his eyes. "I will not leave things the way they are. That's all I can promise." Thaddeus held his gaze for a long moment, then stepped back. Miss Ora gestured for everyone to sit. "Then we got work to do. Sun's going down in a few hours. We need a plan before full dark." They huddled together in the cleared space among the cane stalks. Silas shared what he knew about patrol patterns, blind spots in the overseer's watch rotations, and the weakest entry points around the plantation's perimeter. Pearl described the livestock yard and how she'd seen smoke signals used between field hands working different sections. Isaiah drew a rough map in the dirt, marking buildings and guard positions. Thaddeus knew which enslaved workers could be trusted to fight if it came to that. Which ones were too broken or too scared? Which ones might inform to the overseers hoping for better treatment? Miss Ora coordinated it all, asking questions that made them think deeper, plan better. The afternoon faded into evening. The harsh light softened to gold, then orange, then purple. The group moved to a makeshift shelter deeper in the cane, a spot where old harvesting equipment had been abandoned and overgrown. A rusted plow blade, a broken wagon wheel, enough cover to hide them from casual observation. They shared the last pieces of their plan as night fell completely. Who would move where? What signals to use? How to get word to families who needed to know? Through gaps in the cane, Silas could see the plantation in the distance. Torches flickered to life around the main house and the overseer barracks. More torches burned near the punishment shed, where Letty was still held. The lights looked like eyes watching them, warning them, daring them to try what they were planning. Night swallowed the plantation whole. The torches became small islands of light in an ocean of darkness. In the hollow near the fields, the group gathered around a single lantern turned so low it barely gave off more than a glow. Isaiah sat cross-legged beside Silas, watching the man's hands move through a series of gestures. 1 finger up meant stop. 2 fingers meant move forward. A closed fist meant danger close by. An open palm meant all clear. The boy practiced them back, his small hands mimicking the movements until they became automatic. "Good," Silas said quietly. "Now the sound signals." He made a soft clicking noise with his tongue against his teeth. 2 short clicks, followed by 1 long one. Isaiah repeated it. "That means I'm in position and ready to move," Silas explained. "You respond with 1 long click and 1 short. Tells me you heard and understood." They ran through the signals again and again until Isaiah could do them without thinking, until the patterns lived in his muscle memory rather than his conscious mind. Miss Ora crouched nearby with Pearl and Thaddeus, going over their own preparations. She'd drawn lines in the dirt, showing the layout of the enslaved quarters, which cabins held people they could trust, which ones they needed to avoid, where the best escape routes led. Thaddeus used a stick to mark guard positions. "There's always 2 men near the main gate. another one walking between the quarters and the big house, sometimes a fourth near the stables. The one between quarters and the house changes position every hour, Pearl added. Walks a circuit. Takes him about 15 minutes to complete it. Miss Ora nodded. That gives us a window. Small, but it's there. Silas looked up from his work with Isaiah. I can create a longer window if needed. Draw the guards away from the quarters entirely. How? Thaddeus asked. Fire in the tobacco barn. Small one, controlled. Enough smoke to pull attention, but not enough to spread to other buildings. Guards will rush there. Overseers, too. That's risky, Miss Ora said. Everything about this is risky, she considered, then nodded slowly. You handled the outside. The guards, the barn, cutting off anyone who might bring reinforcements from town. That's your territory, she turned to Isaiah. You lead us inside. You know which families need warning first, which children to wake quietly, which doors stick, and which ones open silent. Isaiah felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Heavy, but necessary. I can do it, he said. Silas studied the boy. Such a small frame to carry so much. But Isaiah's eyes held steady. Determined. They continued dividing responsibilities. Silas would handle external distractions and create chaos that pulled attention away from the real mission. He'd cut fences where needed, block roads that led toward town, make sure no one could easily call for help from outside. Isaiah would move through the quarters with Miss Ora, Pearl, and Thaddeus, quietly waking families who needed to run, freeing people locked in holding cells, getting everyone organized enough to move as a group when the moment came. The plan required perfect timing, perfect coordination. One mistake would collapse everything. Isaiah shifted his position beside the lantern. The dim light carved shadows across his young face. I don't trust white men, he said suddenly. Silas went still. Most of them just hurt us, Isaiah continued. Use us. Sell us. Don't matter if they smile while doing it or not. I know. But you've been different. Since I showed up at your door, you've been helping. Even when you didn't have to. Silas felt the confession he'd been holding back rise in his throat. The truth about delivering Letty years ago. About being the reason she ended up here in the first place. He opened his mouth to tell the boy everything, then stopped. Isaiah needed to stay focused, needed to believe in this mission without the complication of knowing his mother's betrayer was sitting right next to him. There would be time for truth later, if they survived. I'm trying to do right now, Silas said instead. That's all I can offer. Isaiah nodded. That's enough for today. They fell into silence. Around them, the others continued preparing. Silas sharpened a knife on a whetstone, the soft scraping sound rhythmic and steady. He checked his rifle's ammunition, made sure the powder stayed dry, tested the flint. Isaiah practiced moving through the brush surrounding their hollow, testing each step before putting his full weight down, learning which spots made noise and which ones stayed quiet. He moved like water, finding the path of least resistance. Miss Ora watched him with approval. That boy's got natural skill for this. He's had to develop it, Silas said. Living under Blackthorn's watch. We all have. They organized themselves into sleep shifts. 2 people awake at all times while the others rested. Silas took first watch with Thaddeus. An uncomfortable pairing, but necessary. The night deepened around them. Insects sang in the darkness. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once, then fell silent. When Isaiah's turn came to sleep, he curled up near the dying lantern and closed his eyes. Sleep came quickly, driven by exhaustion. He dreamed. In the dream, his mother stood in darkness calling his name. Her voice sounded distant and broken. He tried to run toward her, but his feet wouldn't move. The harder he tried, the further away she seemed to get. Isaiah, she called. Baby, where are you? I'm coming, Mama. I'm coming. but the distance between them only grew. He woke with a start just before dawn, his heart pounding. Pearl sat nearby on watch. She looked at him with understanding. "Bad dream?" He nodded. "We're going to get her back," Pearl said softly. "You believe that." Isaiah did believe it, had to believe it, because the alternative meant giving up, and he'd come too far for that. Miss Ora stirred awake next, then Thaddeus, then finally Silas. They ate a small meal in the pre-dawn darkness, bread scraps and apples that Miss Ora had managed to hide away. Not much, but enough to quiet empty stomachs. The food tasted like dust in Isaiah's mouth. He forced himself to eat anyway. Would need the strength for what came next. The sky began to lighten. Not true sunrise yet, but that gray time before when darkness started losing its grip. Birds began their morning songs. The plantation's roosters crowed from somewhere beyond the cane fields. Silas extinguished the lantern completely. They packed away everything that might make noise or reflect light. The group stood together one final time. 5 people about to attempt something that could save lives or end them. Silas looked at each face, memorizing them. Then he turned to Isaiah and nodded once. The boy nodded back. Silas leaned close and whispered 2 words that set everything in motion. "It's time." They dispersed like smoke, each person moving toward their assigned position. Silas headed toward the plantation's western edge, where the tobacco barn stood. Thaddeus circled toward the eastern fence line. Pearl moved toward the quarters from the south. Miss Ora and Isaiah approached from the north, using the route Isaiah knew best. The group melted into the landscape, becoming shadows among shadows, silent, determined. The plantation slept on, unaware of what crept toward it through the breaking dawn. The first pale light of dawn stretched thin fingers across Blackthorn Plantation. The sky shifted from black to deep purple to bruised gray. Isaiah moved through that twilight like a ghost, his bare feet silent on packed earth. He reached the first cabin door and tapped 3 times, soft, deliberate, a pattern that meant trust. The door cracked open. A woman's face appeared, eyes wide with fear and recognition. "Isaiah? Child, what are you—" "Get your babies," he whispered. "Get them quiet and ready to move. When you hear shouting from the barn, that's when you run." "Run where?" "North Woods. Miss Ora knows the way. She'll be waiting." The woman hesitated for only a heartbeat, then nodded. The door closed as quietly as it had opened. Isaiah moved to the next cabin, then the next, knocking his pattern, delivering his message, watching hope and terror war across familiar faces. Some people trusted him immediately. Others needed convincing. But Isaiah had grown up alongside these families. They knew his mother, knew him. That counted for something. He worked his way through the quarters cabin by cabin, his heart hammering against his ribs with each knock. Any moment, someone might raise an alarm. Any moment, this could all collapse. But the plantation stayed quiet, still sleeping off yesterday's labor. On the western edge of the property, Silas crouched near the overseer barracks, a low wooden building with a single door and 2 windows. 4 men slept inside, the ones responsible for discipline, for punishment, for keeping everyone in line through fear. Silas pulled a metal spike from his kit, 6 inches long, filed to a sharp point on one end. He'd used similar tools years ago for breaking into locked buildings during manhunts. Now he used those same skills in reverse. He wedged the spike between the door and its frame, driving it deep into the gap with careful strikes from a rock wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound. The spike bit into wood and held firm. Even if someone inside tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge more than an inch. Not a permanent solution, but it would buy precious minutes when those minutes mattered most. Silas moved away from the barracks toward his next objective. Every step calculated, every movement deliberate. Behind the barn, Miss Ora worked at a different kind of lock. Two men sat chained to iron rings embedded in the barn's foundation. Both had been there since yesterday's attempted work stoppage, a silent warning to anyone else who might consider resistance. Miss Ora produced a thin piece of wire from inside her sleeve. She'd learned lockpicking from her grandmother, who'd learned it from her grandmother before that. Knowledge passed down through generations of women who understood that survival sometimes required skills the masters would never approve. The first lock clicked open after 30 seconds of careful manipulation. The man inside flexed his freed wrists, wincing at the pain but saying nothing. The second lock proved more stubborn, newer, better made. Miss Ora worked the wire with infinite patience, listening for the tiny sounds that meant progress. Click, shift. Almost there. The lock surrendered. Both men stood, swaying slightly, weak from dehydration and hunger, but standing. "Get to the quarters," Miss Ora whispered. "Help the children move quiet when the time comes." They nodded and disappeared into the growing dawn. Behind the livestock pen, Pearl crouched with an armful of damp hay. She'd soaked it overnight in water stolen from the horse trough. Wet hay created thick smoke when burned. Lots of smoke with minimal flame. Perfect for creating chaos without destroying property they might need later. She struck flint against steel. Once, twice. The third strike produced a spark that caught in the dried tinder she'd prepared. A small flame grew, reluctant but determined. Pearl fed it carefully, added the damp hay in measured amounts. Smoke began rising almost immediately, thick gray plumes that climbed into the lightening sky. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crowed its morning announcement. The plantation was waking. The smoke thickened, spread. Someone shouted from the direction of the main house. Then another voice joined it, confusion spreading like the smoke itself. Pearl slipped away from the fire and moved toward the quarters where Isaiah worked. Her part of the distraction complete. In the punishment yard, Isaiah pressed himself against a wooden fence and watched two guards standing near a small shed. The shed where they'd taken his mother yesterday, where she'd spent the night in darkness and pain. The guards looked toward the rising smoke, distracted, uncertain whether to investigate or maintain their post. One of them made the decision. "Go check that out. I'll watch here." The first guard jogged toward the livestock pen, leaving his partner alone. Isaiah waited until the remaining guard turned away, then moved, quick and low. He reached the shed's door and tested the handle. Locked. But the lock was simple. Old. Isaiah pulled a thin nail from his pocket, something he'd grabbed from Silas's supplies, and worked it into the mechanism. His hands shook, but his determination held steady. The lock clicked. He eased the door open. Letty sat in the corner, her wrists bound with rope and bruised purple from struggling against the restraints. Her dress was torn. Blood had dried on her lip, but her eyes were clear and alert. Those eyes widened when she saw her son. "Isaiah," she breathed. "Baby, no, you can't be here." He crossed to her in 3 quick steps and began working at the knots binding her wrists. "I'm getting you out, Mama. They'll kill you. I brought help." The knots resisted his small fingers. He pulled harder, ignoring the rope burn. Behind him, someone entered the shed. Isaiah spun, ready to fight. But it was Silas, moving silent despite his size. Blood stained his knuckles from the 2 guards he'd disabled on his approach. Non-lethal blows, enough to drop them without permanent damage. Silas produced a knife and cut through Letty's bindings in 2 swift motions. Letty stared at the white man helping her son. Recognition flickered across her face. She'd seen him before, years ago, in circumstances she'd tried hard to forget. "You," she whispered. Silas met her eyes. "We need to move. Now!" Outside, the plantation erupted into chaos. People shouting, running. The smoke from Pearl's fire had drawn everyone's attention toward the livestock pen, while inside the quarters, families gathered their children and precious belongings and prepared to run. Silas helped Letty stand. She could barely walk, her legs cramping from hours spent in one position. Isaiah took her other arm. Together, they moved toward the door. The punishment yard had transformed. Enslaved workers emerged from cabins with tools held like weapons. Others ran toward the fence line where Thaddeus had already cut openings in the wire. The coordinated disruption had given people courage, given them hope. It seemed like everything might actually succeed. Silas guided Letty and Isaiah through the confusion toward the main gate. 30 yards, 20. So close to freedom that Isaiah could taste it. Then Jeremiah Blackthorne appeared. He stood in the gateway flanked by 6 armed men. Not overseers from the plantation. These were reinforcements brought in from somewhere else. Professional. Prepared. Blackthorne's face twisted with rage. I knew something was wrong. Knew someone was organizing this. He raised his hand. The armed men raised their rifles. Stop where you are, Blackthorne commanded. All of you. The yard fell into terrible stillness. Enslaved workers froze mid-step. The smoke from Pearl's fire drifted across the scene like a curtain. Isaiah felt his mother's hand tighten on his shoulder. Silas stepped forward, putting himself between the rifles and the people behind him. Let them go, Silas said. Blackthorne's eyes narrowed. I should have known. Another goddamn abolitionist thinking he can destroy what better men built. There's nothing good about what you've built. Blackthorne nodded to his men. The rifles came up. Take him first, Blackthorne said. Then we'll round up the rest. Everything happened at once. The rifles fired. Smoke and thunder filled the air. Silas grabbed Isaiah and threw him sideways with desperate strength. The bullet meant for Isaiah caught Silas in the shoulder instead, high up, near the collarbone. He spun with the impact and went down hard. Letty screamed. Isaiah tried to crawl toward Silas, but hands grabbed him from behind. Thaddeus, pulling him backward with panicked strength. No! Isaiah struggled. We can't leave him! More shots rang out. Blackthorne's men advancing into the yard. Chaos transforming into something darker, more dangerous. Someone seized Letty, dragged her away from the gate toward the main house. Momma! Isaiah's voice broke on the word. Thaddeus hauled him toward the fence line, even as Isaiah fought against the grip. The boy's world had collapsed into smoke and screams and the sight of Silas lying motionless in the dirt. They reached the cut fence. Thaddeus shoved Isaiah through first, then followed. Behind them, the plantation descended into violence. They ran. The cane stood tall around them, 12 feet high and thick enough to hide 3 people if they stayed low and still. Isaiah pressed himself against the damp earth, his chest heaving with sobs he couldn't control. His hands shook. His whole body shook. He'd lost her, lost his mother all over again. We should move deeper, Pearl whispered, glancing nervously toward the plantation. Smoke still rose from the livestock pen, darker now. Something else had caught fire. Thaddeus shook his head. Not yet. Give it time. They're still searching the perimeter. Isaiah barely heard them. His mind replayed the moment over and over, the rifles rising, the shots, Silas going down, his mother's scream as they dragged her away. This is my fault, Isaiah choked out. I made everything worse. You didn't make anything worse, Thaddeus said quietly. She was alive before I came. Now she was going to die anyway. Thaddeus's voice carried weight. Experience. Blackthorne planned the punishment before you ever ran. You didn't cause that. You tried to stop it. Isaiah pressed his palms against his eyes. Silas is dead because of me. Maybe. Thaddeus shifted position, peering through the cane toward the distant buildings. Or maybe he chose to stand between you and a bullet. That's different. Pearl touched Isaiah's arm gently. The rebellion spread. You know that, right? Isaiah looked up at her, his vision blurred with tears. What? While you were in the punishment yard, Pearl explained, people in the quarters started moving. not just the ones Miss Aura talked to. Others saw what was happening and decided to run. Families with children, young men, even old Samuel who can barely walk. How many? Isaiah's voice came out small. At least 20 got into the swamps before Blackthorn's men sealed the roads, Thaddeus said. Maybe more. We won't know until later. But people got out, Isaiah, because you gave them the chance. Isaiah wanted to feel something about that. Pride, maybe. Relief. But all he felt was empty. He turned his head, looking through gaps in the cane toward where smoke continued rising. His gaze caught on something strange, a pattern of broken stalks leading away from the plantation in their direction. Something had come through here recently, something heavy enough to bend the thick plants. Then he saw the blood, dark red against the pale green stalks, fresh enough to still be wet. Isaiah stood before Thaddeus could stop him. "What are you doing?" Thaddeus hissed. "There's blood." Isaiah pointed. A trail. Could be anyone. Could be a trap. But Isaiah was already moving, following the crimson marks deeper into the field. His heart hammered against his ribs. He knew he should be cautious, knew Thaddeus was right about traps, but something pulled him forward anyway. The blood trail led 30 yards into the cane before ending at a small hollow where the ground dipped slightly. Someone lay there, partially hidden by fallen stalks. Isaiah recognized the coat, the gray hair. "Silas!" He dropped to his knees beside the man. Silas's face was pale, almost gray. His shirt was soaked with blood from the shoulder wound, but his chest rose and fell. Shallow breaths, weak breaths, but breathing. Thaddeus and Pearl arrived seconds later. Thaddeus took one look and started tearing fabric from his own shirt. "Help me get pressure on this," he ordered. They worked together, pressing cloth against the wound to slow the bleeding. Silas's eyes fluttered, but didn't open. His skin felt cold, despite the morning heat. "We need to move him deeper," Pearl said. "Can't leave him here." They lifted Silas carefully, each taking a portion of his weight. The man was heavy, all muscle and bone, but desperation made them strong. They carried him another 100 yards to a more concealed hollow, where fallen logs and dense undergrowth created natural shelter. Thaddeus packed the wound with moss, the way Miss Aura had taught him. Pearl found water in a nearby stream and cleaned away some of the dried blood. Isaiah just sat beside Silas, watching the man's chest rise and fall, willing him to keep breathing. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. Time felt strange in the cane fields. Then Silas's eyes opened. He stared up at the sky for a moment, confused. Then his gaze found Isaiah. "You're alive?" Silas rasped. "So are you." Isaiah's voice broke. "I thought, takes more than one bullet." Silas tried to sit up, but Thaddeus pushed him back down. "Don't move. You'll start bleeding again." Silas settled back, but kept his eyes on Isaiah. Something in his expression had changed. The careful guardedness was gone. Only exhaustion and pain remained. "I need to tell you something," Silas said, "before I lose consciousness again." Isaiah waited. "Your mother, Letty." Silas took a breath. "I delivered her to Blackthorn years ago, when I was still working as a bounty hunter." The words hung in the air between them. Isaiah felt his stomach drop. "What?" "I captured her when she tried to run from a plantation in Georgia. Brought her here. Sold her to Jeremiah Blackthorn." Silas's voice carried the weight of confession, of shame finally spoken aloud. "I took money for it. Went home and pretended I'd done honest work." Thaddeus made a disgusted sound. Pearl looked away. Isaiah just stared. "But I couldn't forget her face," Silas continued. "Couldn't forget the way she begged me to let her go. Told me about her baby boy waiting for her. I didn't listen. I just collected my payment and left." "Why are you telling me this?" Isaiah's voice came out flat. "Dead. Because I abandoned that life. Quit hunting people. Started helping them escape instead." Silas met his eyes. "Every person I freed, I was trying to make up for what I did to your mother, to you. It won't ever balance, can't ever balance. But I had to try. Isaiah felt tears on his face, but didn't wipe them away. You brought her here, he said. You're the reason she suffered. Yes, you're the reason I grew up enslaved on this plantation. Yes, Isaiah wanted to hate him, wanted to scream and hit and make Silas hurt the way he hurt. But he'd also seen Silas take a bullet meant for him, seen him cut Letty's bonds, seen him stand between rifles and freedom. Actions spoke louder than words. Miss Ora had taught him that. What you did was evil, Isaiah said slowly. But what you're doing now, that's different. Silas closed his eyes. Doesn't change the past. No, but it changes right now. A sound made them all freeze. Footsteps approaching through the cane. Thaddeus grabbed a heavy stick, ready to fight. But it was Miss Ora who emerged, moving quick despite her age. Her face was grim. Found you, she said. We need to talk. What happened? Pearl asked. Miss Ora looked at Isaiah. Her expression carried news she didn't want to deliver. Blackthorn is furious, humiliated. He's gathered his men and made an announcement. She paused. Letty is to be executed publicly at sunrise tomorrow, in front of everyone, as punishment for the rebellion. Isaiah felt the world tilt. He's using her as an example, Miss Ora continued, trying to scare people back into submission. Wants everyone to see what happens when they resist. Isaiah looked at Silas, at Thaddeus, at Pearl, at Miss Ora. Then he stood. His legs felt steady despite everything. His hands had stopped shaking. The grief inside him had transformed into something harder, something sharp. We go back for her, Isaiah said. His voice didn't sound like a child's anymore, and this time, we finish it. Late afternoon sun filtered through cypress branches, casting fractured shadows across the clearing where they gathered. The swamp pressed close on all sides, watered dark as oil between twisted roots. Isaiah sat on a rotting log while Silas knelt in the dirt, using a broken stick to sketch their battle plan. The execution platform sits here. Silas marked an X in the center of his crude map. Middle of the main yard. They'll position Letty where everyone can see. Isaiah leaned forward, studying the lines and marks. His chest felt tight, but his mind was clear, focused. Guard towers? He asked. Silas drew 2 squares, north corner and south corner, usually 1 man in each with a rifle. They'll probably double that tomorrow. Overseer barracks? East side, 20 yards from the platform. Silas tapped the stick against that spot. They'll station men around the perimeter, maybe 8 total, plus Blackthorn himself. Miss Ora stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the map take shape. Thaddeus paced at the clearing's edge, while Pearl cleaned her hands in swamp water. We can't fight that many armed men head-on, Thaddeus said. We'd be slaughtered. We don't fight them head-on. Isaiah's voice carried unexpected authority. We do what Silas taught me. Divide their attention. Make them look everywhere at once. Silas glanced up at him, surprised, then nodded slowly. Isaiah continued, pointing at different sections of the dirt map. Pearl, you start fires behind the livestock pen again. Same as before. That pulls guards away from the platform. Pearl moved closer, studying the layout. How many fires? 3. Spread out. Make them think the whole barn might go up. I can do that. Thaddeus, you and 5 others hit the overseer barracks. Don't go inside. Just make noise. Break windows. Fire shots if you have weapons. Keep them pinned there. Thaddeus stopped pacing. You want us to trap them? I want them too scared to leave. Too busy defending their own position to help at the platform. Miss Ora made a thoughtful sound. The boy thinks like a general. Isaiah didn't feel like a general. He felt like someone who'd run out of options except to fight. Miss Ora, you gather everyone who can't fight. Women with babies, elderly folks, anyone hurt. Get them to the swamp edge and wait. When we free Momma, You lead them all south through the water routes. Where south? Silas spoke up. There's a settlement. Free black families. About 15 miles. I've sent people there before. He paused. They'll take you in. Miss Ora studied Silas for a long moment, then nodded. We'll be ready. What about the platform itself? Pearl asked. How do we get Letty down before they… She didn't finish the sentence. Isaiah looked at Silas. The supports. If we cut them, the whole thing collapses. It's built from pine, Silas confirmed. 4 main posts. Heavy, but an axe could do it. Or a saw. We have an axe in the tool shed, Thaddeus said. If it's still there, then that's my job. Isaiah's voice didn't waver. I get to the platform. I cut the supports. When it falls, I grab Momma and run. Silas shook his head. You can't do that alone. You'll be exposed. Then come with me. They looked at each other. The former bounty hunter and the enslaved child planning revolution together. 2 people who shouldn't trust each other, but did anyway. The wound, Silas started. We'll kill you slower than Blackthorn's men will kill me, Isaiah interrupted. I need you there. Silas held his gaze, then reached down and added 2 small marks to the dirt map, showing their approach route. We come from the west. Use the smokehouse for cover until Pearl's fires start. Then we move fast. How fast? Fast enough that they don't have time to shoot us. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the only one they had. A sound made everyone turn. Footsteps approaching through the swamp. Multiple sets. Thaddeus grabbed his stick again. But the figures that emerged weren't overseers. They were enslaved people from Blackthorn. Dozens of them. Families who'd escaped during the first uprising. Young men who'd hidden in the swamps. Even a few who'd been too scared to run before, but found courage now. They came carrying what they could. Hoes, hammers, kitchen knives, lengths of chain. An older man Isaiah recognized from the fields stepped forward. His name was Moses. He'd worked Blackthorn land for 30 years. Heard you survived, Moses said, looking at Isaiah. Heard you're planning to go back. Isaiah stood. We're getting my mother, and anyone else who wants to leave. Then we're coming with you. More voices joined in. Agreement, determination, anger that had been building for years finally finding an outlet. Miss Ora organized them quickly, sorting people by ability. Strong young men who could fight, women who could tend wounds, children who needed protecting. Within an hour, they had nearly 40 people ready to act. Silas watched it happen with something like awe on his face. You did this, he said quietly to Isaiah. We did this. Thaddeus distributed tools and weapons. A pitchfork here, a club there, a rusted blade. Pearl showed people how to move quietly through brush. Miss Ora taught hand signals for communication when voices might give them away. As twilight deepened, Silas pulled Isaiah aside. They walked to the edge of the clearing where fireflies had begun their nightly dance. I can't undo what I did to your mother, Silas said. To you. Isaiah picked up a smooth stone, turning it over in his fingers. No, you can't. But I can stand with you tomorrow. I can try to make the future different, even if the past stays the same. Isaiah threw the stone into the dark water, watched ripples spread outward. My mama used to tell me something, he said, before they took her to the punishment shed. She said people aren't just one thing. They're capable of terrible evil and surprising goodness sometimes in the same breath. Your mother sounds wise. She is. Isaiah's voice hardened on that word. Present tense, not past. And she's going to stay alive long enough to know you helped save her. They didn't shake hands, didn't embrace. But something passed between them anyway, an understanding that transcended words. They prepared through the night in shifts. Some slept while others sharpened tools or reviewed signals. Isaiah found himself unable to rest, so he walked among the gathered people, learning names, sharing quiet words of encouragement. These weren't warriors. They were farmhands and cooks and mothers and children, people who'd been beaten down by a system designed to break them. But they were here, ready to fight. Just before dawn, as the first gray light touched the eastern sky, Isaiah retrieved something from his pocket, a torn piece of cloth. His mother's head wrap, the same one she'd been wearing when they dragged her away. He'd grabbed it during the chaos of the first uprising, kept it hidden against his skin. Now he wrapped it around his wrist, tying it tight. The fabric still smelled like her. Herbs and wood smoke and strength. Silas appeared beside him, rifle in hand despite his bandaged shoulder. "Ready?" the older man asked. Isaiah looked at the gathered people, at Miss Ora organizing the non-fighters, at Thaddeus and Pearl checking their supplies, at Moses and the field hands gripping their tools like soldiers holding swords. Then he looked back at Silas and nodded. They moved out in the pre-dawn darkness. No speeches, no grand declarations. Just 40 people walking silently through the swamp toward Blackthorn Plantation. Isaiah led them forward, his mother's head wrap tight around his wrist, heading back to the place he'd run from 2 days ago. This time, he wasn't running away. This time, he was coming to finish what he'd started. The second dawn arrived cold and gray. Mist rose from the damp earth like ghosts watching what was about to unfold. Jeremiah Blackthorn stood on the execution platform, hands clasped behind his back, like a man surveying his kingdom. 6 armed overseers flanked him in a semicircle, rifles held ready. At the platform's center, Letty Turner knelt with her wrists bound to an iron ring bolted into the wood. Her dress was torn. Bruises marked her face, but her eyes stayed open, scanning the tree line as if she somehow knew what was coming. Isaiah watched from the cover of the smokehouse wall, 50 yards away. His heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought the overseers might hear it. Beside him, Silas checked his rifle one final time, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounded shoulder. All around the plantation perimeter, hidden in brush and behind buildings, 40 people waited for the signal. Isaiah reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 smooth stones. He looked at Silas. The older man nodded once. Isaiah knocked the stones together. Twice, sharp cracks that carried across the morning air. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the hay cart near the barn exploded into flame. Pearl had soaked it in lamp oil during the night. Now it burned like the sun had fallen to earth, sending black smoke spiraling into the dawn sky. Flames leaped toward the barn's wooden wall. 2 overseers shouted and ran toward the fire, abandoning their posts. That's when the noise started from the east side. Thaddeus and 5 others crashed into the overseer barracks area, smashing windows with clubs, firing a single rifle shot into the air, creating chaos and confusion. More guards rushed that direction. On the platform, Blackthorn turned sharply, trying to understand what was happening. His remaining 4 guards raised their rifles, scanning for targets. Near the quarters, Miss Ora and a group of women worked quickly, cutting chains from workers who'd been locked down overnight. Metal rang against metal as shackles fell away. People rose to their feet, free for the first time in years. Silas moved left, circling toward the platform's blind side. His rifle stayed low. He'd planted rope snares during the night. Crude, but effective. An overseer pursuing someone toward the tree line stepped wrong, and suddenly jerked upward as a concealed loop caught his ankle, hauling him off his feet. Another guard tried to aim at the running figures, but triggered a different trap. A bent sapling Silas had rigged released with vicious speed, its heavy branch catching the man across the chest and knocking him backward. The platform stood more exposed now. Blackthorn screamed orders, but his voice got lost in the growing chaos of smoke, shouts, and confusion. Isaiah didn't wait any longer. He burst from cover and ran straight toward the platform. A rifle cracked. The bullet hit dirt 2 feet to his left. Another shot. This one passed so close, he felt the air move against his ear. He kept running. His legs pumped. His breath came in gasps. The platform grew larger with each stride. An overseer stepped into his path, raising a club. Isaiah didn't slow down. He dove low, sliding in the mud beneath the man's swing, then scrambling back to his feet. 10 yards. 5. He leaped onto the platform steps just as Blackthorn turned toward him. The plantation owner's face twisted with rage and recognition. "You," Blackthorn snarled, reaching for a pistol at his belt. But Letty moved faster than anyone expected. Despite her bound wrists, she threw her weight sideways, her shoulder slamming into Blackthorn's knee. The man stumbled. Isaiah reached his mother. His hands shook as he pulled out the stolen blade, a kitchen knife Pearl had given him, and began sawing at the ropes binding Letty's wrists. The fibers parted. Strands snapped. Letty's hands came free. She grabbed Isaiah's face, checking him for injuries even as gunfire echoed around them. "Baby, we're leaving, Mama. Right now." That's when Silas appeared at the platform's far end, rifle leveled directly at Jeremiah Blackthorn's chest. The plantation owner had recovered his balance and now held his pistol, but Silas's weapon never wavered. "Put it down," Silas said quietly. Blackthorn's face went purple with fury. "You're a dead man, Mercer. You and every—" Silas cocked the rifle. The sound cut through Blackthorn's words like a blade. "I said, put it down." The pistol clattered to the platform boards. Silas moved closer, keeping the rifle trained on Blackthorn's center mass. With his free hand, he pulled folded papers from his coat pocket and threw them at the plantation owner's feet. "Sign them." "What?" "Emancipation papers. Every enslaved person on this property. Sign them. Now." Blackthorn laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think anyone will honor?" "They will when witnesses see you sign." Silas gestured with the rifle barrel toward the growing crowd. People had emerged from everywhere. The escaped enslaved workers, townsfolk drawn by the smoke and commotion. Even the traders who'd arrived yesterday, now watching with wide eyes from a safe distance, all of them watching the platform. Moses stepped forward from the crowd, holding an ink pot and quill he'd retrieved from Blackthorn's own office during the chaos. "Sign it," Moses said. Not a request, a command. Blackthorn's hands trembled as he knelt and picked up the papers. His face had gone from purple to pale. He looked at the crowd, at the rifle, at the smoke rising from his burning property. He signed. Each page, every line. His hand shaking with rage, but moving nonetheless. When he finished, Moses took the papers carefully, holding them high so everyone could see the signatures. Witnesses called out confirmation. "I saw him sign. It's legal. He put his name to it." Blackthorn rose slowly, hatred burning in his eyes. "You'll hang for this, Mercer. Every one of you will—" He lunged forward, trying to grab the rifle. Silas stepped back smoothly. Thaddeus and 2 other men were already moving, converging on the platform. They caught Blackthorn before he could reach Silas, wrestling him down, pinning his arms. The plantation owner struggled and cursed, but he was outnumbered and outmatched. Isaiah helped his mother stand. Letty's legs wavered, weak from hours of kneeling, but she gripped her son's shoulder and found her balance. Miss Ora climbed onto the platform, wrapping a blanket around Letty's shoulders. "Come on, child. Let's get you away from this place." The crowd parted as they descended the platform steps. Freed people reached out to touch Letty's arm, to whisper words of relief and joy. Some wept openly. Silas lowered his rifle as local authorities arrived, a sheriff and 2 deputies drawn by the smoke and reports of violence. The lawmen looked stunned by what they were seeing. Silas handed them his weapon without resistance. "I'm turning myself in. I have crimes to answer for." The sheriff blinked. "What crimes? Ask them." Silas nodded toward the freed people. "I helped enslavers for years. Hunted people trying to be free. That deserves justice." Isaiah started to protest. but Letty squeezed his shoulder gently. "Let him go," she whispered. "He knows what he needs to do." The deputies took Silas into custody, but before they led him away, he caught Isaiah's eye one final time. No words passed between them, just a nod of understanding. Then Silas was gone, walking toward whatever judgment awaited him. Miss Ora organized the exodus quickly. The freed people gathered what few possessions they had. Families reunited. Children who'd been separated from parents found each other again, in tearful embraces. They moved as a group toward the road leading south. Toward the homestead Silas had legally transferred to them during the night. Documents he'd prepared weeks ago, just in case. Land that would be theirs now. Not borrowed, not stolen. Theirs. Isaiah walked beside his mother, supporting her weight as they crossed the plantation boundary for the last time. Behind them, smoke still rose from the barn. The execution platform stood empty, its purpose ended forever. At the road's edge, Isaiah stopped and turned back. He looked at Blackthorn Plantation, at the fields where he'd worked since he was old enough to walk, at the quarters where he'd slept, pressed against his mother's side, at the punishment shed that had haunted his nightmares, all of it shrinking into the distance now. Letty touched his face gently. "You all right, baby?" Isaiah took a long breath. Then he whispered 4 words that carried the weight of every terror he'd survived and every fear he'd overcome. "This is the last place I ever ran from." The second dawn broke pale and cold over Blackthorn Plantation. Isaiah crouched in the tall grass at the eastern edge of the property, his heart hammering against his ribs. Beside him, Pearl held a smoldering torch low to the ground, waiting. Thaddeus stood 20 yards to the left with Moses and 4 others, tools gripped tight in their hands. Further back, Miss Ora positioned herself near the quarters with the women who'd volunteered to help free the chained workers. And somewhere in the shadows near the tree line, Silas waited with his rifle and the traps he'd spent half the night rigging. On the execution platform in the center of the yard, Jeremiah Blackthorn stood tall in his finest coat, flanked by 6 armed overseers. Letty knelt on the wooden boards before him, her wrists bound behind her back, her head held high despite everything. The platform had been built overnight, a hastily constructed stage meant to send a message to every enslaved person who might think of resisting. Blackthorn wanted them to watch, wanted them to see what happened to those who defied him. Instead, they would see something else entirely. Isaiah pulled 2 smooth stones from his pocket. His hands shook slightly as he brought them together once, testing the sound. Then twice more. Sharp, clear, the signal. Everything happened at once. Pearl touched her torch to the hay cart, positioned near the barn. The dry straw caught instantly, flames roaring to life with shocking speed. Black smoke billowed upward, thick and choking. Overseers shouted and ran toward the fire, abandoning their posts. That's when the noise started from the east side. Thaddeus and the others crashed into the area near the overseer barracks, smashing windows with clubs, firing a single rifle shot into the air to create maximum chaos and confusion. More guards rushed that direction, trying to locate the source of the attack. On the platform, Blackthorn spun sharply, attempting to understand what was happening. His remaining 4 guards raised their rifles, scanning desperately for targets. Near the quarters, Miss Ora and the women moved with practiced efficiency, cutting chains from workers who'd been locked down overnight. Metal rang against metal as shackles fell away. People rose to their feet, some weeping, others standing in stunned silence as freedom touched them for the first time in years. Silas moved through the chaos like a ghost, circling toward the platform's blind side. His rifle stayed low and ready. The traps he'd planted during the darkness worked exactly as intended. Crude, but devastatingly effective. An overseer pursuing a running figure toward the tree line stepped wrong. A concealed rope loop suddenly jerked tight around his ankle, hauling him off his feet with violent force. He hit the ground hard. The wind knocked from his lungs. Another guard tried to take aim at the figures moving through the smoke, but triggered a different trap. A bent sapling Silas had rigged released with vicious speed, its heavy branch catching the man square across the chest and knocking him backward into the dirt. The platform stood more exposed now, fewer guards protecting it. Blackthorn screamed orders, but his voice got lost in the growing thunder of smoke, shouts, and spreading confusion. Isaiah didn't wait any longer. He burst from his hiding place and ran straight toward the platform. A rifle cracked somewhere to his right. The bullet hit dirt 2 feet to his left, kicking up dust. Another shot followed. This one passed so close he felt the air move against his ear, hot and terrible. He kept running. His legs pumped harder. His breath came in ragged gasps. The platform grew larger with each stride, his mother's form becoming clearer. An overseer stepped directly into his path, raising a heavy club high. Isaiah didn't slow down. He dove low at the last second, sliding in the mud beneath the man's swing, then scrambling back to his feet without breaking momentum. 10 yards away now. 5. He leaped onto the platform steps just as Blackthorn turned toward him. Recognition flashed across the plantation owner's face, quickly replaced by pure rage. "You!" Blackthorn snarled, reaching for the pistol tucked into his belt. But Letty moved faster than anyone expected. Despite her bound wrists and weakened state, she threw her full weight sideways, her shoulder slamming hard into Blackthorn's knee. The man stumbled, his hand missing the pistol grip. Isaiah reached his mother in 2 strides. His hand shook violently as he pulled out the stolen blade, a kitchen knife Pearl had given him the night before, and began sawing frantically at the thick ropes binding Letty's wrists. The fibers resisted. He pressed harder, pulling the blade back and forth. Strands parted. More separated. The rope weakened. Finally it snapped completely. Letty's hands came free. She grabbed Isaiah's face immediately, checking him for injuries even as gunfire continued to echo around them, even as the world burned and fought and changed. "Baby, we're leaving, Momma. Right now. No more waiting." That's when Silas appeared at the platform's far end, his rifle leveled directly at Jeremiah Blackthorn's chest with absolute steadiness. The plantation owner had recovered his balance and now gripped his pistol. But Silas's weapon never wavered, never dropped an inch. "Put it down," Silas said. His voice carried quiet authority, despite the chaos surrounding them. Blackthorn's face went deep purple with fury. "You're a dead man, Mercer. You and every single one of these—" Silas cocked the rifle. The metallic click cut through Blackthorn's words like a blade through silk. "I said, put it down." The pistol clattered onto the platform boards. Silas moved closer, keeping perfect aim on Blackthorn's center mass. With his free hand, he pulled folded papers from inside his coat pocket and threw them at the plantation owner's feet. "Sign them." "What?" "Emancipation paper. Every enslaved person on this property gets their freedom. Sign them. Now." Blackthorn laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that held no humor. "You actually think anyone will honor?" "They will when witnesses see you sign." Silas gestured with the rifle barrel toward the growing crowd gathering at the platform's base. People had emerged from everywhere during the fighting. The escaped enslaved workers, townsfolk drawn by the massive columns of smoke and reports of violence. Even the traders who'd arrived yesterday for the planned sale, now watching with wide, shocked eyes from what they considered a safe distance, all of them staring at the platform, all of them watching what happened next. Moses stepped forward from the crowd, holding an inkpot and quill he'd retrieved from Blackthorn's own office during the chaos. "Sign it," Moses said firmly. "Not a request. A command from a man who'd spent too many years taking orders." I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have hand-picked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.